Trista, I want to thank you for taking this time this morning to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Very early. And it's a beautiful, nice, wet day today, too.
Yes, it is. Sometimes we need rain.
A lot of times we need rain.
Yes, absolutely.
I wouldn't have it any other way. I like the greenery and the fact that it keeps us nice and moist. I love that.
Absolutely, yes.
So tell me, Trista, let's start off with where were you born?
I was born in a town called Camden, New Jersey. Some people may or may not know it. It's a pretty tough town. However, when I was born, it was a gentrifying town at that time.
It was a what town?
Gentrifying. So at that time, it was very
they're gentrifying.
Economically diverse, right, town at the time. And it was the home of Campbell Soup.
Okay.
So Campbell Soup was produced there.
Right.
And then shortly thereafter, my parents were probably the first kind of generation of African Americans that went to college, right, in bigger numbers. And so they were very upwardly mobile. My mom said she was a teacher. My dad, he went back to school actually. He was in Vietnam for a while, went back to school
to
Temple.
Where?
Vietnam for a while.
Vietnam for a while. Are your parents still doing well?
They're doing very well.
All right. Do you have siblings?
Yes. I have two sisters. They're twins.
Are they older or younger?
Younger than me. So I'm the oldest.
How many years difference?
5 years difference.
Okay. Are you guys close?
Now we are. We were not so much when we were growing up.
Okay. Mom and dad are still together?
Yes, still together.
Okay.
They just celebrated, oh goodness, like right before the pandemic, 50 years together.
Well, that's nice. How old is your dad? I'm just curious.
He was born in 1945, so that would
He's
not
much older than me.
He'll be 78 this year, I guess, yes. And my mom is older. She's 9 months older than my dad.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
That's why they're still together.
Yes.
You said,
older,
I'm gonna get this
little
one.
older,
I'm
little
on
wiser.
this.
Who knows? Yes. But yeah, I lived. Coming back, I grew up. I was born in Camden, New Jersey, but I moved into a town called Mount Laurel, New Jersey.
How old were you in that house?
I was 4.
So your sisters were born in Mount Laurel, New Jersey.
In Mount Laurel, New Jersey.
Mount Laurel,
yes.
New Jersey.
Exit is people from New Jersey would know this. Exit 4 on the turnpike. So New Jerseyans, we tend to designate ourselves based on our stop on the highway, right?
Okay.
In terms of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that's where I moved when I was 4. It wasn't terribly easy because my family was the first Black family in this town.
Oh, so this is an all-white town?
Yes, all-white town. Well, it wasn't all-white town. This neighborhood within the town was all-white.
Okay.
And it was very difficult, and I have a really incredible story. When we were moving in, my mother had a real estate agent who was a Quaker. I don't know if you know much about the Quakers. Quakers were very kind of progressive, much focused on human rights for hundreds of years. And she was a wonderful woman. And when she found the house in this neighborhood, my mom and my dad found this house they loved, and they kept increasing the price. And this woman said, they're doing this to you. It's most likely because of your race, but we're not going to let them do this to you. I'm going to loan you however much money you need, and you're going to get this house.
What year was this?
This is in 1979.
Okay.
So 1978 to 1979 when this happened. And the woman loaned my mother the house. My mother eventually, my dad, my mom eventually paid her back. And I say my mom because my mother had a very close relationship with her. And it was just an incredible story. And at first it was quite difficult because, we were the only ones. We were harassed. I still remember at 4 years old being harassed.
But tell me this, so when you went to school, what was it like for you at school?
It wasn't easy. It was okay. I think okay is the best word. I had friends.
Well, you didn't know anything else. That was the first time you went to school.
Yeah, I didn't know anything else. I was always the only one.
Okay.
But in many ways, for me, that strengthened me in a kind of, and probably is the reason that I'm here where I am now in many ways, because I got used to being the only one. I got used to functioning in that way. I understand what you're saying. I see.
Well, what about relatives? What about your relatives?
My relatives and my grandmom, my mom's mom were very close. My dad's parents were in Pittsburgh. My mother's mother was in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And my mom actually came from a broken home. Her parents were divorced at a young age. My grandmother, since after that, remarried, and she was living in Philadelphia. My grandmother, she's since passed on now, but she was just an absolute rock for us. When my mom couldn't, because she had to work too, right? She had to work, then my sisters came, then I came. My dad actually worked for a lot of my upbringing far from home because he He worked in transportation.
So he
Actually, with
wasn't there
trains.
all the time.
So he
when you
wasn't
were
there all
young.
the time. He was an office worker, right? He just had to travel to work.
Okay.
So we either had to go up to New York, or he had to go to Philadelphia, or he was working long hours. So it was quite difficult for him, I think, to be there. And back then, it was, the roles between men and women
I
were very
understand.
different, right?
Yes.
And my grandmother was often there to pick up the slack. She
So
was
she
the
came over
one.
to your home and she was
Yes,
there with you.
yes,
So did she
when
raise
she
you up
could.
until how old do you think?
So my mother, of course, my parents were raising me, but
I
my
understand. Right.
grandmother was working too at the time. But when she could, she would come over and help, and she was just always there up until the point where I went to college. I went off to school.
Is she still alive?
Yes, she was still. She
I mean,
passed away
oh,
when my son was born 10 years ago. So she was in her
okay.
80s when she passed
Okay.
away.
I see.
She
Well,
she passed
she
away.
said she wasn't married, right?
But by that point she wasn't, because her husband passed away.
I
That
see.
was her,
I see.
my
I see.
step grandfather.
That's interesting.
But she lived into her 80s, which unfortunately towards the end she had dementia, so it was difficult at the end.
Oh, I see.
But my great grandmother passed away in her 50s.
Did you know you knew your great grandmother?
I didn't on my mother's
Okay,
side.
okay.
She passed away before I was born.
All right.
But I just like to tell that story because I think a lot that healthcare and proper care for people makes
yes.
makes a complete difference
See, we're in a country
terms of
where
our
we understand
longevity
that,
in life.
right?
Yeah,
But you wouldn't know any
Yeah.
difference if you
Yes.
hadn't traveled.
exactly. Yes,
That's what makes all the
exactly.
difference. And when you go
Yes.
back, I think it's really interesting. When you get outside the forest, then you can see the trees.
Yes, you can.
And in my 60s, I finally came up with an analogy about how I feel about America.
Hmm.
All right. Now, you grew up in America until you were age what?
I left the U.S. when I was 24.
Okay, so
So
you
my
all
whole
your
upbringing was in the U.S.
right. So
Pretty
all,
much in the same,
adolescence all the way up.
pretty much in the same town.
Okay,
Most of
but
my
now some of the people, a lot of the people are your friends because they
Yes.
know you're the one black kid there, or the one they know, or whatever,
Yes.
black family.
Yes.
Did the other black families move in?
Later on. So by the time my
What's later
sisters
on?
got to high school, I think one of the main issues was that there wasn't sufficient housing, right? So I think there was a concerted effort to keep people out at that time.
I
Okay.
understand.
But I think also you need certain types of housing, right? You need people, maybe if people have lower incomes, you need townhouses, right?
I hear what you're- I
You know what
hear
I'm
you.
saying?
I
So
hear
even
you.
if that family is intact, it's just maybe their income level isn't necessarily as high as other people's. A lot of people in that town had been there a long time. There was actually a history. The interesting thing about this town, Mount Laurel, was it was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. So there was a history of black
Like
families in this. So
coming
there
through.
still is,
Okay.
but not
But
very
not
many.
where you live though.
Not in
the
my
little
part of the
not in your
town.
part of the town.
If you
but
went,
across the tracks.
yes.
You could say that.
If
Right.
you went a kilometer away, yes.
Right there it was.
Yes.
I hear you.
And so I grew up with some black friends, absolutely, but not that many.
But were they at
So-
your school?
Yeah. So at my school, there were a few of us in the school, and the '80s was just a funny time, I think, in terms of transition from the world that was before to the world that is now. And the world that is now is far from perfect, right? But that was the time when we were starting to see a little bit more representation, right, on
I see what you're
TV
saying. I see
or
what you're
in
saying.
music or these types of things. But
Okay,
it was
I got
still,
you. I got you.
but in many ways, I was still kind of the odd one out, right, for much of my life. And I think in many ways, this kind of just, I think it's hard for kids to go through that, right? I think it's really difficult, but it strengthens you in some ways too.
It can or it can make you go crazy.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it depends. It's like a piece of it's like a piece of paper.
Yes.
It doesn't take a whole lot.
Yes.
I had someone that I just had on the podcast the other day.
Right.
Opposite, the only
Yes.
white kid in an all black neighborhood.
Interesting.
He said he was in New York, always picked on,
Yes.
always, he said he called it being mugged, but him being mugged is someone taking your lunch money. That's
Yes.
what we call being mugged. And I said, listen, why would you expect any difference if you're around kids that have been traumatized all their lives from birth?
Yes.
I was in my
That's true.
60s before I realized why I love America so much, yet I can't live in America. And the reasons being is that I use the analogy of, it's like growing up with abusive parents. That's all you know. You love them.
Yeah.
They kiss you, they hug you times, and then they do something that traumatizes you.
Yes.
They show you a picture or something, or they say something to you, or
It triggers
they
you.
they do that. It traumatizes, and there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah.
And then they give you money so you can travel.
Yes.
You travel to other countries, and you find out not all parents treat their children the same way my parents treat me. And one other thing, my parents have told everybody what they do to me.
Mm.
That also hurts. Adding insult to injury.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to pick which one do I like the most? Fox, CNN. They're all telling the world what they do to me.
Yes.
That you're talking about adding insult to injury.
Yes.
But I love them. I'll defend them with my life, but I can't live with them.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how I look at America.
I think I would say that, I left the U.S. when I was 24 years old. I had never considered leaving the U.S. I was very much, I grew up in a kind of, like I said, my family was doing pretty well. We were considered what was called black bourgeoisie, right? And so I always assumed that I was going to live that life. I was going to, marry somebody who looked a certain way, lived in a certain type of town, maybe go to Martha's Vineyard in the summer, have a house in a certain way.
Did you think the person was going to be black?
Of course I did. Absolutely.
Wait. But everyone you saw, you had crushes. How could you have crush on a little black boy if there were no black boys in your school?
I had crushes on little white boys too.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
There's a difference between what I might think I like and what I'm allowed or I believe I'm permitted to like. Right?
Oh, I hear you.
So life tells you that you're supposed to, and also you have to remember, I was also and I am a darker skinned woman, right?
And we have that same, right?
Yes. So my perception was I was going to marry a guy who looked a certain way, and we were going to do this and that. But who I ended up marrying, what my life ended up being, completely different.
I hear you.
I would never have envisioned that for myself. And I always like to think that, you go through life and people and God and put things and people in your life to kind of show you a different path. And I took a totally different path. Although my mother always says, now she says, of my 3 daughters, if I had known that anyone was going to be living around the world like you do, Trista, and working, it would have been you. I guess she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Your sisters, what are they doing now?
Oh, so
are they?
So they're both still in the U.S.
They're twins?
Yeah, they're twins.
Are they fraternal?
They're fraternal. They're very different.
Okay.
You wouldn't even know, in high school, when they were in high school, people didn't even know they were sisters.
Sisters, okay.
Imagine this. One looks a lot like me and the other one doesn't. Looks more like my dad's.
Was it because of color-wise too?
No, they just don't look different. They don't look alike at all. Okay, and they're very different in terms of personality, right?
Yeah.
And so I have one, she's a salesperson. She works in the U.S. She's doing very well. And she's, she lives outside of Cincinnati. And I have another one who's living outside New York, in Jersey City. And she works actually for Nintendo, which is kind of interesting, right? She works for Nintendo in New York. And she does marketing and sales for them. They're both single.
Okay.
And I'm the only one who's married, and I'm the only one I have the only grandchild, right? Too,
so your parents just covet your kids.
Yes.
You only
it's
have,
hard being that
you have
way.
one child.
I
you
have
your
one
son.
son.
Right,
yes.
your son. So they covet him. He comes, and he's a little king.
Yes, exactly. He's a great kid. And so, so my sisters and I were very close now, but growing up we were not, right? Because they're 5 years younger than me. They're twins. Twins are very mischievous. I don't know if anybody who has multiple children at one time will tell you. And I was the oldest. And I was also growing up, I was a very serious child. I was and maybe because of this trauma that you mentioned, right? Of having to kind of
does that resonate with
live
you?
in this,
what I'm saying?
having to live in this world, and you can't be too loud, and you can't be too aggressive, and you can't be too this, and you can't do that. You have to wear a mask most of the time, right? And I was very controlled. I was very conservative. I don't mean from a political perspective, but I mean in terms of my behavior. When I went to
you self-controlled, or you felt that
self-controlled.
Okay, you were very controlled.
I put a lot of control on myself.
Right, just to be careful because you walk. One guy said to me this way: he always felt like, because he grew up in the same environment. The difference is he's not African American. His parents came from Nigeria, from Kenya.
Yes.
And he got the talk, which I've never got.
Yes.
Maybe you did. I don't know, but I never got the talk. He said, but his talk was different.
That's interesting.
Because he's not African American.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Really interesting. Let me ask you this. So you said that you were very reserved. He said he was walking, the term he used was walking on eggshells. He was always walking on eggshells. And it wasn't until he got here that he was able to feel like, I fit in this space.
Yes. And for me, that was, after I finished high school, I went to University of Pennsylvania. I was always this type of kid that was like, I'm doing that. And
Okay.
that's what I'm doing.
Were you more academic or were you more physical?
I was academic, for sure.
Academic. You didn't get into the physical things, the sports?
Not really. My mother forced me to play basketball once. It was a disaster. I was a cheerleader in high school. I was captain of the cheerleader squad because I was like, that's what I should do. Being a cheerleader is a good thing to do. You get to be cute and you get to be this and you get to be smart and you get to whatever. So, it was that's kind of as sporty as I got. But when I was 11 years old, roughly, I said, I want to go to University of Pennsylvania, 11. And I ended up going to University of Pennsylvania.
Why University of Pennsylvania?
I think because they had a really good, at that time, they had a really good journalism school. And for some reason, I got in my head I wanted to be I'm not a journalist, right? Although I write now. So maybe some ways, a little bit I am. That's what I wanted to do. And as I went through high school, I got a boyfriend who was in another town. He actually was from a town called Willingboro. Okay. And Willingboro is a black town.
So he obviously was black.
Yes.
Okay.
And so this was interesting because his whole conception, it was really good that I had that experience, even though my dad didn't like him so much. But it was good because I got to see what being black was like in a predominantly black place.
Because he took you there at times.
Yeah.
And you got to be
I used to go to hang out with his friends. It felt, first of all, I mean, he felt like I was, at that time, he felt I was super attractive, right? So he would like show me off. So this was a new thing for me. Being shown off. I would never have been shown off before, right? So there was a part of me that liked that. But then I also saw that, that was the first time anyone really talked to me about injustice, really talked to me about history and what we had been through as a people. I had kind of grown up. My parents exposed me to that, absolutely.
But they didn't push it on you.
But yeah, exactly. So and of course my parents are trying to exist in this world, right?
They're doing the same thing you do, right? It's the same thing, right? They don't want to say something to you that you might say that could get you in trouble.
Exactly. His dad was actually in the Black Panther Party when he was, not at that time, but years before, okay? And so he went on to become I think it was called a shop steward in a factory in Philadelphia. So he was I remember, like, brash, and he was just totally different than my dad. My dad is such a, super intelligent, intellectual, reserved guy with lots of dignity, right? And this other gentleman, he had dignity in his own way, right. But he was just very tough. And,
he wasn't going to accept
what
he was told to accept.
He was confrontational, right?
If he needed to be, right.
And this, I thought, was such an interesting thing for me. It was important for me to see that. And I think my parents were worried I was going to, I don't know, get pregnant or whatever. But coming back to what I said before, I was entirely too controlled of a child to let that happen to me. I was like, I'm doing this. And so I went off to college. And actually, before I was going to college, I was going to kind of go to this school near my boyfriend. And my dad was like,
not going to happen.
You're not doing that. He was like, that school there, it was not a bad school, but you go to a better school. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to what I wanted was University of Pennsylvania. And so I applied to Ivy League school. I did not think I was going to get in. I got in. And of course, my dad is like, this costs a massive amount of money. Right?
What am I doing? What am I doing? I shouldn't have pushed you. Maybe you can go with your boyfriend now. Get closer.
So they paid some. I eventually paid some. So I went to school. I graduated.
To study what?
I studied. I was in Wharton undergrad. So I went in studying accounting. Right. This is such a funny story.
For what reason?
Because I thought that accounting was a good job to have. It was a good, stable job.
Okay.
And so then, after about 2 years in, I was like, I hate this. I hate accounting. It sucks. It really is just boring. I didn't want to do it. So I go home to my parents and I was sitting at the table. I remember sitting with my mom. She was there that day. I think my dad was at the store or something. And I said, Mom, I'm thinking about changing my major from accounting. And she was like, but I might want to change to marketing. And my mother was like, what? I don't care. Just as long as you graduate. I don't care. You graduate, you can support yourself.
Do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want.
But you had an idea that she might be really concerned because you're thinking, accounting can help the family.
Exactly. But my mother, like I said, she's a school teacher. My mother taught 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade kids. That was her world. She knew nothing about business
or any of that stuff. Right.
She didn't care.
She just wanted to make sure you had some.
She said to me and my sister, she said, you don't have to do anything, but you have to get a college education. She was like, you're going to school and you're going to graduate and you're going to support yourself eventually. That's it. You can do whatever you want, but you had better do that. So I went to Penn. I graduated from Penn. While I was in Penn, I pledged sorority with AKA. Historically black sorority.
Go ahead.
My generation, Gen Xers, we are, well, now we're getting kind of old, but we are like at our time, we were considered slackers. This is a generation of gangster rap um,
Oh,
and hip
yes.
hop and grunge and fight the power. People were very outspoken. Grew up with Spike Lee movies and this type of thing, right? And I went to campus, and it was an absolute revelation for me, right? I remember the first year there was this guy. There's this basketball player. I knew him very actually, and he played for Penn, and he went on to play for the Sixers actually for a short period of time. And this guy wrote this article in the Daily Pennsylvanian saying that this basketball player got in because he was a basketball player and he was black, and his grade point average wasn't the same as everyone else's. He wrote a whole article about that. So the
This is a
black
white
student
guy that
union,
did this. The white guy did
yes,
this. Okay.
yes. So the black student union, which I can't remember the name, it's escaping now. It's awful. Basically, the next day, coordinated and got up and stole every single newspaper on campus and threw it in the trash.
Before people can even get it.
Yes, they got up at 4 a.m., stole every news, and it was like an absolute scandal at that time, right? But I think it's so, I think the thing that's so interesting about that is that, like, I feel that as people get older, we tend to very much criticize young people. Oh, they don't know what they're doing. Oh, they're this, they're lazy, they're not whatever. They're talking out too much. They're too much this. They're speaking too loudly. But this is what young people are supposed to do. This is like the time in your life when you can kind of do a crazy thing, when you can speak and say what you want without having to worry about losing a job or having to worry about all these other things that we as adults have to worry about, right? Because we have bills to pay, we have kids to take care of. And I felt like that was my time in life to kind of be around people who were willing to say crazy stuff and do crazy things and fight and debate and what have you, right? And then eventually you get older and you settle down and you don't do that. Well, I don't know now if that with social media if that's the case anymore, but at that time,
it still is, don't you think?
to an extent, I think older people now maybe sometimes we say.
But Trista, what you're saying is so profound and
Yeah.
so true because,
Yeah.
for example, all the wars are fought with average 18-year-olds.
Yes.
The reason why is if a guy's 40 and you said he say, hey,
I can't
if the
take that risk.
first bullet comes this way or something, I'm done.
running. Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
done. Why? I got too much to lose. I've been around life. I'm
That's
starting to
true.
like this. But when you're young, your body's changing and you
Yes.
think you're invincible.
Yes.
You think you're immortal.
Yes. Yes.
That's the reason why.
And you're finding out who you are.
You are finding
figuring out what you're willing to fight for.
Right from wrong and everything else. Because
Yeah.
most of the things that have
Yeah.
been done in the world have been done by adolescents.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
teenager wasn't even a term until
Yeah.
I forget what it was the 19-something before the term
Yeah.
teenager even existed.
Ah,
There was no
interesting.
such word.
Yeah, interesting.
That came into I want to say the 1940s or late 1930s, the word teenager started. But there was
Yes.
no such thing
Yes.
before.
Yes.
You were an adolescent, then you became an adult, period.
Exactly. And the
Because-
bad side of that is that energy can also be easily manipulated and harnessed for bad things, right?
That's true.
And we see so much of that, particularly these days. But I think for me, it was a time in my life. I was learning to live on my own. I had bouts of time when I struggled with relationships at that time quite profoundly in ways that when I see young women today, I'm like, don't do that. Don't do
Please
that.
don't.
Please don't do that. You have your whole life ahead of you. You have so many things you can do. Like I said before, remember I said I had this whole plan, right? And so my plan too was I was going to get married at a certain age and whatever. So you have to do things according to plan. But my life showed me that actually life isn't about a plan, right? It's about spontaneity. It's about learning how to deal with the cards you're dealt, whatever those cards are. And so I finished school. I moved back home with my parents because, that's when people started to do
So when you
that.
say finish school, you did 4 years.
4 years. I finished in 4 years.
And you got your
Thank
degree
goodness, too
in?
expensive. I ended up doing it in marketing and human resource management.
Okay. All right.
And I started working with General Mills. I was a
Immediately,
salesperson.
because your mom showed you your plate with your name on it. She said, "You remember what I told you, Trista?"
Yeah, exactly.
You better get your own money.
Exactly. So I got a job with General Mills as a salesperson working in trade marketing.
Okay.
Which was a really interesting job because there were two things that were really interesting about that job. There were three things. That was a period between the time when people used to sell things like cereal to supermarkets on a golf course. right? So the deals you made were golfing.
Oh, yes,
even
yes.
even in that profession, right? Like that happens a
got
lot
you.
in banking or
I
other
got
things.
you. I got you.
To sell cereal or yogurt to a supermarket chain,
You better be on.
you go out and you golf or
With the
whatever.
guy, right.
So what this meant was that most of the salespeople, with the exception of 2 at that time, were principally men, potentially white males, right? Usually older, right? So in their 50s and their 60s, right? And they had secretaries. This is 1996. Like every one of them had secretaries who would answer the phone,
For them,
right? And this is when most companies were moving away from that. Most companies were moving to a model where that's kind of, you don't do that's kind of superfluous or whatever. But it was like this transition. And then I remember this guy, he was a super nice guy. He was the head of sales.
Now, where are you again? Now, tell me where you were again.
Horsham, Pennsylvania.
Horsham, Pennsylvania.
And I was living in New Jersey with my parents, and I moved, and I would travel every day. I would drive every day.
How long of a drive is it?
It was about 45 minutes every day.
Okay.
Over the bridge to Horsham, Pennsylvania. And I remember that at some point, the guy who was the head of sales had a stroke. He was probably about 60 at that time. It was very sad, very sad. He survived the stroke, but he couldn't work anymore. They brought in this younger guy, and the next day, he was like, voicemail. There was no voicemail when I started working. No voicemail. Can you imagine? And I think by that time, a lot of people had voicemail, right? But it was just very old school, even consumer products. And so I did that, and that was one thing that was interesting. So just it was very male dominated. And now if you look at consumer products, it's not like that anymore. It's a lot of women. Because what they eventually figured out, well, 80% of our customers are women. Maybe it would be a good idea to have some women in these companies. And so, so mostly male, no technology. And then I think the third thing was that it was, you would kind of, it was also like, because nobody used technology, when I went out into the field, I eventually went out into the field and was actually working as a sales rep, which meant I worked from my house. Okay. And the job was so easy at that time.
So what were you selling?
Cereal.
You were selling. You had to sell the cereal too.
And I had two reps that reported to me. So I was only maybe 23, 24, and I had 2 people reporting to me. Both of them were older women. That was super interesting too. But I was working from my home, and that was the start of people having technology in their homes, right? And working with technology in their homes. And because I had kind of grown up with computers, I knew how to use it. So I was done by noon every day.
Right.
So I would work, I would go see my customer, I would do my trade. You had to do this kind of trade plan. I was done by noon. I would kind of turn on the TV. Good Times was always on at noon. It was really funny. And then I go to the gym, and then I come home. I was in the best shape of my life, right? Not because I was 23 or 24, but because it was so interesting, because technology was starting to infiltrate the workplace, but yet there were still whole generations of people who never really used computers much in their lives. And so everything was organized around an old way of working, but because I had this new way of working, I was very efficient at it, okay? So I did that. After a while, I said, you know what? I don't want to do this the rest of my life. And so I decided I wanted to go to business school. Once again, I said, well, where am I going to apply to? I want to be in marketing. I'm going to apply to the best marketing school. Maybe I'll get in. I applied to Kellogg, at Northwestern, right?
Yes.
I got in. So I get into Kellogg. It's a massive amount of money, but I get loans and all this stuff, fine. And I was like, I'm going. I had a scholarship somewhere else, actually, but because it was Kellogg, and because I go to the best, and this is my plan, I ended up going to Kellogg. I go, I meet, of course I meet lots of other people, it was cool. But then, the end of the first semester, I met this guy. And I was at this party. We had this strange party. It was I think they banned it because eventually it was such a liability to have this party for the school. They had to ban it. It was called Brand Challenge. And basically what would happen was companies would provide products, and you would do games. Like the students organized it in the school. But of course, who were the sponsors. Anheuser-Busch.
Oh.
And, like Smirnoff and these companies, right?
I'm thinking cereals and stuff like that.
No.
Twinkies, Hostess Twinkies.
So eventually they had to get rid of it because it was such a liability. But there are so many things that we used to do in schools that no one would do now, right? Even in universities. Like I remember when I was in high school, there was a smoking section in the high school, okay?
Yeah,
in the high school.
Okay.
Yeah, things like this we do not do anymore. Anyway, so we had this thing, and everybody's drunk, of course, because this thing, right? And I wasn't because I didn't really drink very much. And this guy comes up to me, and he was like, I know who you are. And this guy comes up to me, and he's a white guy who comes up to me, right? I know who you are, or whatever. And I'm like, is this guy hitting on me? I was so shocked.
Okay.
I had never in my life.
Now, how old are you now? You're 20?
I'm 24, 25.
24.
Okay?
You didn't have a boyfriend at that time?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I was dating different people around that time. It
Okay,
wasn't working out or whatever. So he comes up to me. He's hitting on me. I was completely shocked. I had never had a white man in my life hit on me. Never.
But you realized that's what he was doing?
Yeah, I was first a little confused.
Because, okay, if he was really hitting on you, if he's trying to play with you or something.
And then he was like, do you have a boyfriend? And I said, no. And then he's like, well, that's crazy. He was like, if I was interested in you, I would keep, calling and treating you well until you said yes. And then he was like, would you go out with me? Like on a date? And I said, I don't know you. I have no idea who you are. But, we'll see. We'll see each other around school. And we eventually went out on a date. And that guy is my husband.
All right.
I ended up marrying him. I'm still married to him. Been married to him over 20 years.
All right.
Okay. We celebrated our 20th anniversary last year.
But you had some rocky times during the dating time, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, and actually the biggest problem.
I'm sure you threw some of that Panthers thing on him too. Said, well, yo.
I know, yeah. The biggest problem was I tried to explain to him because, in the school, there's the black students, right? And the black students, we were very much a tight-knit group, okay? Now, none of the guys, and they might say something different today if you ask them, right? So you may want to contact them and ask them, but none of them wanted to date me, okay? But as soon as this guy started dating me, they were like, why is he dating you? What's going on?
Now they're interested.
Now they're interested. Now they're accusing him of doing things. You can't date him, Trista. I'm like, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And so I told my now husband this, and I said, this is going to be difficult. I'm telling you it's going to be. He was like, what are you talking about? He's from Northern California, okay?
Oh, he's a Cali, like
yes.
me.
And so
He believes so.
I remember when we were going to meet his parents. Father-in-law actually was a West Point grad.
All right.
Went to Wharton actually to get his MBA. My mother-in-law was a homemaker and then went back to school and studied nutrition. And got her degree, and they're triathletes. If you could, they've done the Ironman multiple
And they're
times.
still good. They're doing well.
They're doing well. I mean, they've had health challenges and stuff, but they're doing really well.
How many children do they have?
My husband and my brother-in-law. So they have 2 sons.
And he's younger than your husband?
Yes.
How many
so
years
we're both
difference?
oldest children, me and my husband.
Okay. So how many years difference is he from his brother?
I think it's roughly 5. Same.
Okay.
Same. Yeah, same. Mark and I, my husband is Mark, we both are absolute first children. Like our behavior, how we act with each other, we are totally
what you're
first.
expecting, right? Of course.
I know, yeah.
Because you're the first.
Exactly. But anyway, coming back to when we met, so it was difficult because it was like people were very skeptical of him. But by the end, everybody loved him.
What's
right?
by the end? How
by the
long
end
by
of
the end?
2 years.
Okay, 2 years.
End of MBA.
Because he went through all
the
this stuff and he stuck out.
And he was a cool guy. And my husband actually, it's so fascinating because now he's a venture capitalist, right? Now he's very orderly and very orderly. But he was a reggae DJ.
A reggae? Wait.
A reggae DJ.
Wait, did he have the accent? Yeah, man.
No, he did not. He did not do the accent. He can do that. He sort of. He was DJ Dub Marcus in Chicago. And in Chicago at that time, they only had one reggae radio station, and it was done by Northwestern. And he did it when he went to Northwestern undergrad, and he continued to do it. And it was just such a cool thing.
Of course
right?
it would be.
Super cool. He would take me to reggae clubs. I remember one time he was like, I told him, I was Christian. I like to go to church and stuff sometimes. And so he's like, well, I'm going to take you to my church. And so we went to this church. I don't think it was really his church, but we did. And it was
a black church?
Black Jamaican church. And so the song sounded like reggae music. It was so incredible.
I understand.
But he was just such a change from anyone I knew, And so, but by the end of school, then this is another crisis. So the end of school, he comes to me, he says, Trista, I love you very much, but I want to go to Paris and become a venture capitalist.
That's where the French comes in. Okie dokie.
What? I had never been to France.
Now, how old are you this time? Wait, you guys weren't married yet. You weren't married yet, were you?
No, we were not married yet.
Okay, right. But
we were just dating. We were dating. We were not engaged. Okay? This is another thing, too, because I was like, I am not going to move in with you till you put a ring on it.
That was your policy, period.
That was my policy.
Now, how long had you dated before?
I think we were together about 18 months by that point in time. And so I said
Wait,
to him,
he got engaged after 18 months?
no. We were not engaged after the 18 months, but he said he wanted to go after business school. He wanted to move to France, and he wanted to do venture capital, which is crazy for two reasons. One, because it was so far from home for me. But secondly, there wasn't really any venture capital in France.
And does he speak French?
He did because he grew up as an expat kid. So he lived part of his life in Brussels. He lived part of his life in Tokyo. That's why part of his reason we're here. And he lived part of his life in Brussels. And so that's where he learned French. And he continued with it.
He went to school here?
He did. He went to ASIJ for 2 years.
What year?
2 years. Oh, gosh. 1980 to 1983.
I taught there at ASIJ main campus from 77 to 80.
Ah, you might have.
He could have been possibly crossed at that time.
Maybe.
And I was still there. I had the gymnastics program
Ah.
in the multi-purpose room.
Yes.
That's interesting. Oh,
Yes.
the world is so small nowadays.
It is.
And I wouldn't know your husband if I saw him because I don't know what your husband looks like.
He's around here sometimes. He swims a lot. Mark
Okay.
Bivens. He's probably at the pool now. But my husband is an extremely resourceful person.
But what did he do? Did he go to France?
Yes.
But wait,
He
without you?
Yes. He went without me first. And I said to him, I was like, look, I love you too, but I'm not moving to France until you propose to me. I'll go to London instead.
Oh, you said that?
Yes. I'll go to London instead.
Well, he wanted to. Did he say he was going to propose to you?
He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure at that point, right? He was like, I don't know.
All this time. So I know that had to make you kind of.
Yeah, so I was like, I'm not moving to France until you propose to me. I will go to London. So we were kind of close. So yes, and so it definitely influenced my choice. And in some ways, looking back on it now, like how I am now, I would never have done that.
It's a good thing that you're not the way you are now. Then.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good thing that you're not the way you are now.
But I would never be where I am now if I hadn't done that.
Exactly. I'm just saying.
But I moved to London, and it was so great because it was the early 2000s. I didn't even have internet in my apartment, and I worked all the time. When I say all, consulting is grueling, right?
You changed companies.
Yeah, I changed companies.
To do what?
I got a job. So I did marketing consulting with Monitor Group. And it was, for me, I worked so much. I would get up and go to the office. I would get there by 9. And this is London, right? I don't know if you've ever lived in London.
No, I haven't lived there.
The weather is so crazy that there's no point in even carrying. No, it's not even like this because this is like actual rain.
Right.
London, it's like misty rain.
I know.
It's like going in different directions.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Umbrella won't help you one day.
Exactly.
You're going to get wet no matter
So I remember like these days it'd be like that, and I would get up and get there by 9, and I would be there easily until midnight. And I would call my mom sometimes, and that my mother yet hadn't like adjusted to. Like, and my mother always picks up the phone. Never my dad; he wouldn't pick up the phone at that time. Now he does. But she hadn't adjusted to the time difference yet, right? Because Americans, we don't really think about time difference, right? We don't realize that actually the rest of the world has a different time zone sometimes. Not always, but especially the way it used to be, right?
That's right. But
now I think it's different, right? Now it's more different. We're more connected. We're more networked. And so I'd call her. I'd be talking to her. She'd be like, "Wait a minute, what time? Is it midnight?" Like, she's like, "Why are you still at work?" I worked until 1. I went home. I slept 3 hours. I changed. I got on a flight that next day to Switzerland. It was crazy.
For your job?
Yeah, for my job.
How long did you do that?
I did that for the crazy hours. I did probably for 2 or 3 years. But I did consulting in total for 6 years before I got headhunted into another job.
In London?
In London. Well, the first 2 years were in London, and then my husband proposed, right?
After when?
After 2 years.
Okay, so you were there 2 years.
After a year. It was after a year, because we got married in 2002.
Okay.
And he proposed.
Was it something that you expected? Did you know that was going to happen?
No, and actually he laughs at me because he always tells people, when Trista asked me to marry her, she said no. And that's not what happened.
What happened?
I said, "No, you're not serious." Like,
no.
I was so shocked. I said, "No, you're not serious. This can't be real." Because I was just shocked. Yeah. But we got engaged. We actually got married in France. We had our wedding at in a Protestant church, which is hard to find in France. a Protestant, just very Catholic country,
Right,
in a town called Reims. And Reims is a town where they make champagne, where champagne comes from. And
No, champagne comes from Champagne.
well, it comes from the Champagne region, but
Right,
this
Champagne region,
town
right. Makes
is like the
champagne, right.
capital of the
I got you,
Champagne
okay.
region. Right?
Okay.
And so we had our reception in a champagne house, which was awesome. And I remember when he proposed this
Did
idea.
your parents, did his parents, your parents?
Yeah, everybody came. And so at first I was like, Mark proposed the idea of having the reception in the champagne house. And so I said, well, you know, everybody's going to have to come, but maybe we should get married in New Jersey. He was like, Trista, we could get married in New Jersey, or we could get married in Champagne and
you seriously said that you were seriously thinking about it?
Yes, the rule of the Champagne house was you can either no Coca-Cola, no soft drinks, all the champagne you can drink, and some water. You can have water too, and red wine with the cheese. That was the rule.
That was it. Period.
But no, they were like, because somebody was like, can we have Diet Coke? They were like, oh
Nope.
no.
No.
Hyper high six champagne.
We're not going to do that. No.
Yeah.
Hell no.
But it was awesome. And it was cheaper than if I got married in the U.S. Because in France, weddings aren't a big business, right? In the U.S., weddings are
it's a business. It's a business.
It's a business. So you got
your 2 hours.
Yeah, you get your 2 hours.
But there you stay all day till I know.
We went home at 4 a.m. People were like, the Americans were like, "What's going on?"
It's a whole event. It's a whole event. How many people came?
So we had in total the wedding. It was smallish, about 70 people came.
Oh, that must have been beautiful.
But it was awesome. It was absolutely incredible.
It had to.
My grandmother was still alive then. She came as well.
Did you? I'm sure you video recorded some of it, even though the videos were kind of big.
I don't know if we did it then.
You didn't
I have pictures, tons of pictures.
Okay, but
I don't know if we had video recording.
Yeah, maybe it still wasn't as easy.
Yeah.
What year did you get married? What year?
2002.
You could have, but you'd have to know somebody.
But it would have been a big thing.
I hear you.
And but it was just absolutely awesome, right? And so then I moved to Paris, and the interesting thing was, all this time I was living in London, and I love my British friends, but I was just not really taken with the UK, right? London is a very.
Did you ever pick up the accent?
No, I never. I didn't even.
You didn't even try to. You didn't even try to. Wow, you thought that'd be kind of insulting?
Yes, insulting and a bit weird, and I just couldn't do accents very well. But I just never really took to it. I think London is the kind of city like you learn to love. You discover it over time. It's huge. There's so much complexity, so many different areas. It's an incredible town. It's an incredible city, but it takes time. It's not beautiful when you see it.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
Whereas Paris is beautiful when you see it. It is so easy. Paris is easy to fall in love with, and it also can break your heart. It's that kind of town, right? So we were going over, and I just loved. I think I just loved France. I loved everything about France. It was. I love that people would have debates and be okay after that.
You know
right?
what I mean? Yes, and hug and kiss after that. No problem.
Even today, it's hard.
That's French.
And when I go back, I have debates with people sometimes, and it makes me uncomfortable. But at the end of the night, people are okay with each other, right?
Right, exactly.
And
they don't hold that forever and ever.
No, it's not violent in the same way. You know, I love that people took their vacation, you know, and it was normal vacation. Even people who were super senior. I love that the food was so good. I love the wine.
Isn't it? And no one gets huge.
Yeah.
People stay in good shape because they eat so well.
Yeah. And they also walk a bit more.
And they do everything else. And they don't ask you if you want dessert. That's a taken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's stuff that your body can digest.
Yes. I loved it. And
it's all natural. Oh, so nice.
And the language, this is why I think language learning too, there's a certain element of, passion for the culture and the language. And so I was able to learn French. My French is still not perfect, but relatively decently without much formal education. So I didn't actually really take formal classes. I would just go to dinner parties and debate with people, right? And in France, I always tell people are like, I want to learn how to learn how to speak French. I'm like, you have to learn about French politics. Learning about French politics is by far the best way to learn the language because so much of French society is connected to politics, right? In a way that the U.S. isn't, right? We in the U.S. are like, oh, politics, and we don't really like it, even though we're very
different. But it's different.
Yeah, it's different kind of politics. We're political in a different way, but people like to talk about it. They like to debate it. They like to, and they say, no, we don't. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Compared to having grown up in a place where you never talk about it. we never talk about in the U.S., right? Because it's so difficult.
And it becomes,
for
it becomes
us.
so heated and it can become
Yeah,
violent.
it's very
you just
difficult. Exactly. You just
don't.
don't.
No, you just
But
don't.
people just, I would read the newspaper. I learned words that I never knew existed.
And how much of English is really French?
Yeah.
A lot
Yeah,
of our
exactly. A
words,
lot.
déjà
Yeah.
vu, a
Yeah.
lot of the words we use are
Yeah.
French.
And
we
so
don't know it.
rendezvous, which doesn't
Right.
mean the same what it actually Americans think
What's
it
that?
means. Rendezvous.
Rendezvous? We don't say that in America.
So people, I remember when I was growing
We
up,
don't
people
say
would
that.
say like a rendezvous was kind of like this liaison.
Oh,
like,
rendezvous. A rendezvous. Oh, you say
Rendezvous,
rendezvous.
yes.
Yeah, we say rendezvous. We don't say
Yeah.
rendezvous.
Rendezvous. Yeah. But all that means is a meeting.
That's right. Of course, it's just a rendezvous.
That's what it is. But
that's
it
all
has
it
this
is.
like kind of
But
intimate sexual connotation, which is funny. Yeah.
Right,
But
right.
yeah. So anyway, I learned French. I eventually moved there. I changed jobs. Eventually, I worked with Thomson Reuters, which is
Right.
it spun out now. It's called Refinitiv, but a market I didn't know at all. I was headhunted to do it because they wanted a good marketing and strategy person. I ran a division for them for some time, and after 6 years, we parted ways because they wanted to take the job in a different direction, and so I left. I did something totally different. I said, I'm going to learn about technology. I'm going to become a blogger. So I became a tech blogger. Imagine.
While you're in
France.
France.
Yes.
Okay.
And I co-founded a blog with a gentleman who's a lot younger than me. He's a millennial. This was also a really good learning experience for me. And we co-founded this blog together and wrote about French technology and English. And at that time, France's startup scene was very small. Now it's huge. Now it's like a huge industry for France. But at that time, 2012, 2011, 2013, it was the beginnings really of it. And so it was incredible. I met all these really interesting people. I was writing. That really helped my writing skills because I was learning how to write and how to write quickly, have a point of view, write about something that's interesting for people. We also tried to do a media tech product as well, which didn't work out in the end anyway. But it was a great experience. It really brought me into the world of technology and new technology and venture capital and all of that stuff I knew nothing about, right? I did that for several years. And then after that, Mark and I decided that by the time we got our French nationality, so I have American nationality, I also have French nationality.
How long did you have to live there to get that?
It changes a lot. So not at that time, it was about 5 years.
5 years, okay.
And paying taxes. It's really important to pay taxes.
Did you keep your U.S. nationality?
Yes, so you can have both.
And Mark did the same. He
did the same. So he kept both. And we had our son. Our son was born in 2010.
But he became French automatically.
Yeah. He became French automatically because we had it.
Oh, but if you didn't, he wouldn't be able.
The rule is he would have to reside for a period of time, and then when he turns 11, he can ask for it.
Then he could do
but because his parents by that time were French,
he
was technically, we laugh about it too, because we're like, he's actually French. There's a term called franco-français, which is like French. Yeah. Right. And he was born in Paris, and so, but after a few years, we decided we needed to change, and so we decided to move here to Japan.
Why'd you pick Japan?
Because my like I said, Mark lived here when he was young, so he had very fond memories of Japan.
Why wouldn't he?
His aunt was Japanese.
How long did he live here? How long did he live here?
Just about 3 years.
What do you mean his aunt is Japanese?
His uncle married a Japanese woman, so he grew up.
Uncle. Oh, his uncle, but not his father.
Not his father.
Okay,
his
okay.
Uncle. Yeah.
Right.
And he had very fond memories. You know, when you're, I think he lived here between 8 and 11. When you're that age, like it really kind of has a mark on you, I think.
If you have a good place, good or bad, that's right.
And in the 80s in Japan, that time was awesome, right?
It was before the bubble. Oh, everybody had money. Everywhere you could do anything you
wanted.
You
could run anywhere, do whatever you want. It was the beginning of technology,
that's
like video gaming.
Well, Japan was way ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So there were huge arcades, and so and we had been coming here on vacation a lot, and I loved it. And I just thought I just needed a place that was more quiet. Japan is a very quiet place.
It is very quiet.
And I needed a place where people.
Oh, you mean in France? It felt a little loud.
Oh yeah, France is like I said, it's a very passionate country. It's a country.
That doesn't mean they're not loud. I mean.
I can think about the place. Not
like we go down to the south of the border in California, you go down to Tijuana. That's loud.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, completely. No, I don't think France is. No.
I meant more.
I loved it
more like. I needed a place maybe a little bit more orderly.
Okay, I can hear that.
Where people didn't respond to stuff with much emotion. And now it's funny, having been here 7.5 years, I really miss it. I realize that my true nature.
Well, you need that.
I need that kind of energy. I miss that energy, right? But I still.
But you have the francophone group here.
Yes. So I spend a lot of time. My son goes to the French school, and I
Right.
do spend a lot of time with
The
French
French,
friends
because
too,
they're
yeah?
very tight.
Yeah, and I'm also a
Who's
part
the-
of a French book reading club
Okay.
as well.
Oh, that's nice.
So I came here, and actually, and this is also another funny story. So we came and we were deciding, okay, well, who's going to be the person who gets the visa? So I decided to start a company, consulting firm, and so I got the visa. And at that time, my husband was the trailing spouse.
At the beginning.
Yes,
Okay.
at the beginning. So, my husband was, by the time he was a venture capitalist, he had done all these things and whatever. And it was so funny because coming to Japan, where your husband is a trailing spouse, is a kind of a thing that people don't immediately suspect. So
They
people
don't
were
suspect that,
constantly
right? But
asking,
now it's been
did you
coming
come here for your husband? Did you come here for your husband's job? I'm like, well,
out. He came
actually,
here for me.
it was a joint decision. And
Right.
actually, I was the one who was and they're like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Now we both have our visas, and he runs a venture capital fund here and everything. But in any event, so I did that. Started working in consulting, did some projects, still do a lot of work with Europe, actually, some clients from there. But then I started to really get interested in the topic of sustainability.
Right.
And I met a gentleman. We actually met through our children were in a mutual drama class together. And that's kind of how I met him. We started talking, and we realized we had common interest in this topic. And so I said to him, I was like, well, why don't we write a book? And the premise of the book was we wanted to write a book that was going to be for people who really don't know anything about this topic, who are going to have to do something with it, right? And so what we decided to do was just interview people. We're like, well, why don't we just name a bunch of companies and see if they'll talk to us, and we'll do interviews. So at first I didn't think they were going to say yes, but then they were all like, sure. So we interviewed for the book. We interviewed Coca-Cola. We interviewed H&M. We interviewed Sony. We
On
interviewed
sustainability.
on sustainability.
On what they're doing.
And what they're doing. And we interviewed lots of smaller companies, startups. We interviewed the Rise Fund, which is the largest impact. I think it's not KKR. I think KKR's fund, maybe their fund. But anyway, it was a very large private equity company that has a venture fund. And we just didn't think they were going to talk to us. And they were like, sure, we'll talk about it. And so we did all these case studies in the book. And actually, it's become a really helpful tool for people.
What's the name
right?
of the book?
Leading Sustainably.
Okay.
And I would say at least every 2 months. I have
Can they
somebody
get it
from-
on Amazon?
Yeah,
Can they
you can get it on
okay,
Amazon.
awesome.
Somebody in the world is like, I bought your book.
Do you have it on
reading
Audible? Not yet?
That's a good question.
You should put it on
No.
Audible.
Yeah, that's a
Put
good
it on
question.
because I listen to
Yeah.
books more than I read them.
Yeah.
Because people won't do it's just so easy now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so now I work as a sustainability advisor for companies. I advise a venture capital fund on ESG and sustainability integration. I work with companies on that topic. And I've also gone back to school. I'm doing a part-time doctoral
You get your
program.
doctorate, okay.
It's a joint program between Durham University in the UK and EM Lyon, which is a very good business school, called the Grande École Business School in France. And
wow.
so it's going to take me 4 years to do this.
And you're going to get it in what?
It's a doctorate in business administration, and I'm going to focus on my thesis around sustainability.
Right.
I'm thinking about doing something around sustainability and innovation because that's a really interesting area in sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
People think about sustainability, they always think about cost and regulations, and I think some of that is really interesting too. And I do a lot of work actually in the regulatory front. But the whole innovation side of sustainability and what we can create differently.
Right. Instead of what
It's
instead of trying to
such-
regulate stuff, what can we make better?
Yeah.
Thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, we have to regulate to an extent because people need
That's true.
carrots and sticks.
That's
That's
true,
how
that's
human
true.
beings are. But the opportunity and things we can do differently is just endless. And I
It
think,
is.
people who kind of push back and want to keep things the same way, like
Yes.
human beings don't do that. We come up with new things. We come
That's
up with
true.
new
That's
ideas.
true.
We move things forward. We can't stop one thing from today and do something different tomorrow. Yes, but we can work on new ways of doing things, new technologies, new ideas, new products, and there's a lot of people who are, sustainability entrepreneurs who are doing things in a sustainable way, who are doing incredible things.
That's so true.
So,
There's one thing, Trista, I found that most people feel, and it's the truth, from
Yeah.
being here and from all the
Yeah.
organizations I've been a part of, no one likes change unless they're the ones doing it.
yes, true. Yes.
You don't mind changing stuff around your house, but if
Yeah.
someone else does
Yes.
that, you don't like that.
Yeah.
So the thing you have to do is what you've been doing, the book you have, getting with the people,
Yeah.
and getting them excited and motivated so they feel like they are the ones
Yes.
doing the change. So I think your book is one good thing that people
Yes.
you guys should go out there, get the book, and really read it so that you can start to understand what sustainability is really all about.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
going to do that, but I'm going to wait until it gets on Audible.
Okay,
That's
the next thing I need. It's a very good point.
If it isn't on there yet, I want to get on Audible.
Exactly. And the last thing I will say on my
Sure.
topic is I talk to a lot of young people about this topic. I've taught seminars. I taught a seminar at Berkeley. I've taught seminars, for example, at Temple. I've done several talks at Temple. I used to do some roundtables there. And honestly, young people are so engaged in this topic. And it's funny, I'll do some case studies, and the young people, I hate to say it, but they often do better on this because they don't have the same constraints around how business is supposed to work.
And they don't want to change. Look, they want it to be better as they get older.
Yeah.
We're thinking we're on the way out, so let's keep it the way it is. Got another 20, 30, and I'm out of here.
Exactly.
So that's the problem.
Yeah.
But the young people will be the ones that are going to push it forward.
Yeah.
It has to be them.
Yes, absolutely.
They're the ones that are going to do that.
Yeah.
Trista, before we end, I'd like to ask this question.
Yeah.
This has been very interesting. I mean,
yeah.
first time really talking to you in depth. I talked to you when you first got here, just for a little time.
Yes.
And this the second time we've really talked. It's been wonderful.
Yes.
I'm going to have you on again for sure.
Okay, I'd be glad to come back.
Trista, let me ask you this. If you could go back in time magically and talk to the younger Trista,
yes,
knowing what you know now, what advice would you give her? And how old would she be?
Other than buy Apple, that would be my first one. Remember in 2001, 2002?
Get stock, make sure you get some Apple.
No, but I would say I'd probably go back to probably the 13, 14-year-old Trista, and I would say life doesn't have. I would hate to say it because then I might not be here now, right? I might not be here in this spot now, and I think I'm in a wonderful place. I'm so happy with where I am in my life. But I think I would probably say live a little more. Don't be so controlled about everything.
What would that be? When you say live a little bit, well, what do you picture in your mind?
I picture like not having this, detailed plan for everything. I really had a detailed plan for everything. I think I would just say, you know what, accept that life is going to change. And yes, have some kind of broad ideas, but be okay with the change. And I think I would also say, like, travel, see things, go places. I remember when I was in, like, for example, I never did study abroad when I was in college. That was a mistake. I absolutely should have done study abroad. I never even did, I remember before business school, there was this trip that they would organize for people to go on. I didn't do that. I was like, no, I'm going to do that. I need to just go. Why didn't I do that? The world is so enormous and has so many incredibly interesting things. I think that this is, the idea of kind of even being in one country for the rest of my life is uncomfortable for me now, right? I always, I go to France, I'm like, oh, it's lovely, but I miss Japan. I miss Japan. I'm like, oh, so I miss France.
You've seen
it, yeah, exactly. And so I like traveling. I try not to, of course, too much. I try to do so responsibly because of my carbon footprint and all, right? Especially in Europe, I take trains and these types of things. But there's so many incredible things to see on this planet. And I think as a younger person, I think I would definitely tell my younger self, go see things. And fortunately, I didn't start doing that before I was much older, right? I was still pretty young, but I think I would have done it sooner. So,
Trista, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all unknown. So continue to reach for the stars.
Because you're too blessed to be stressed.